Just a quick note before we begin. This explainer is an AI-generated summary of Dr. John Wist's fantastic lecture on diffusion. For generations of us in pulmonary and critical care, his textbook, Respiratory Physiology, The Essentials, has really been foundational. You should absolutely watch his original lecture series. The link is in the description. And feel free to browse the summaries of his other lectures right here on this channel.
So, Section 1, the physics of diffusion. At the heart of everything we're talking about today is this beautiful, simple process of passive diffusion. Every single respiratory gas, oxygen, CO2, it all moves across that alveolar capillary barrier just by following its partial pressure gradient. It's a downhill slide from high pressure to low pressure. And the principle that governs this entire exchange is Fick's law.
Fick's law really gives us the blueprint here. The rate that a gas moves, V dot gas, is directly proportional to a few things. First, the surface area, A. The more area you have, the more gas can cross. Second, the partial pressure difference, P1 minus P2. That's the driving force. The bigger the gradient, the faster the flow. Now it's inversely proportional to the thickness, T. A thicker barrier means slower diffusion. And finally, you have D, the diffusion constant, which is a property of the gas itself. We're going to see how the lung has evolved to optimize these variables and how disease messes with them.
Okay, let's talk about that area variable. The lung is just a masterpiece of biological engineering when it comes to maximizing this part of Fick's law. It manages to pack a massive surface area, somewhere between 50 and 100 square meters, all inside your chest. To put that in perspective, that's roughly half a tennis court. This huge area is probably the single most important factor for maximizing gas exchange.
So if the lung maximizes area, it does the exact opposite for thickness. It minimizes it like crazy. The barrier between air and blood is unbelievably thin, often less than half a micron. If you look at this electron micrograph, you can see the alveolar cell and the capillary cell literally fuse their basement membranes together. It's this beautiful, delicate structure, and what holds it all together, giving it its strength against the pressure of the blood, is a network of type 4 collagen. That's what stops it from just rupturing.
Last up is the diffusion constant, D. This one depends on two things: how soluble the gas is in the tissue and its molecular weight. Now look at this table. CO2 is a bit heavier than O2, which you'd think would slow it down. But, and this is the key point, its solubility is about 24 times greater. This massive advantage in solubility just blows away the slight weight difference. The result? CO2 diffuses through tissue about 20 times more easily than oxygen. Clinically, this is huge. It's why you almost never see hypercapnia or CO2 retention from a pure diffusion problem. The gas just gets across too easily.
Okay, Section 2, diffusion versus perfusion. Now that we've got the barrier figured out, we can ask a really fundamental question. For any given gas, what's the actual bottleneck? What's the rate-limiting step? Is it the diffusion process itself? Or is it the blood flow, the perfusion, that's needed to carry the gas away once it crosses?
And you really feel the pressure of this question when you look at the clock. At rest, a single red blood cell has only about 3/4 of a second, 0.75 seconds, to make its entire trip through a pulmonary capillary. Think about that. That's all the time it has to dump its CO2 and pick up a full load of oxygen. Everything we're about to discuss has to happen inside this tiny window of time.
This leads us to two very different situations. We say a gas is diffusion limited if the transfer rate is capped by the properties of the membrane, how thick it is, how much area there is. In this case, you'll see a big pressure gradient that lasts all the way down the capillary. On the other hand, a gas is perfusion limited if it crosses the membrane so fast that the blood equilibrates almost instantly. At that point, the only way to get more gas across is to bring more blood flow to the lungs. Carbon monoxide is the classic textbook example of a diffusion-limited gas, and the reason is simple. It's love for hemoglobin. CO binds to hemoglobin more than 200 times more tightly than oxygen does. So as soon as a CO molecule gets into the plasma, bam, it's snatched up by a red blood cell. This acts like a sink, keeping the partial pressure of CO dissolved in the plasma incredibly low, almost zero. This maintains a huge driving gradient from the alveolus to the capillary all the way along its length. So the only thing holding back CO uptake is the diffusion barrier itself.
Now, nitrous oxide is the polar opposite. It couldn't care less about hemoglobin. It doesn't bind at all. It just dissolves in the blood. Because of this, its partial pressure in the blood shoots up really fast, and it completely equilibrates with the alveolar pressure within the first tenth of the capillary's length. For the rest of the trip, that last 90% of the capillary, nothing happens. No more gas moves across. The blood is full. If you want to get more nitrous oxide into the body, you have to increase blood flow. It is purely 100% perfusion limited.
So Section 3, oxygen under stress. This brings us to the gas we care about most, clinically, oxygen. So where does O2 fit in? Is it diffusion limited or perfusion limited? Well, the interesting answer is, it depends. Oxygen's behavior isn't fixed. Normally it's perfusion limited, but when the system is under stress, it can absolutely become diffusion limited.
So, at rest, in a healthy lung, oxygen is perfusion limited. Take a look at this diagram. The mixed venous blood comes in with a PO2 of around 40. The alveolar PO2 is sitting at 100. That blood PO2 rises rapidly, and it actually equilibrates with the alveolar PO2 within the first third of its journey along the capillary. This is fantastic. It means we have this huge safety margin, the remaining 2/3 of the capillary length, that we call the diffusion reserve. This reserve is crucial, but it's not unlimited.
So when does that reserve get used up? There are three main situations where oxygen transfer can flip to being diffusion limited. First, if the barrier gets thick, like in interstitial lung disease, you're directly increasing the T from Fick's law, slowing things down. Second, during really heavy exercise, your cardiac output goes way up, and that slashes the capillary transit time to maybe 1/4 of a second. There just isn't enough time to fully equilibrate. And third, at high altitude, your inspired PO2 is lower, which means the driving pressure gradient is much smaller. In any of these cases, the blood might leave the capillary before its PO2 reaches the alveolar level, and that is a direct cause of hypoxemia. Okay, Section 4, measuring DLCO. This isn't just theory. We have a way to measure the functional integrity of this entire system in the pulmonary function lab. We quantify it using what's called the diffusing capacity, or DLCO. So the test is the diffusing capacity of the lung for carbon monoxide. It's defined as the volume of CO that moves from the alveoli to the blood each minute for every millimeter of mercury of pressure gradient. Now, why do we use carbon monoxide? We use it for that very specific reason we talked about earlier. It's diffusion limited. Its uptake depends entirely on the membrane, not on the blood flow. We make the assumption that the capillary partial pressure of CO is 0 because hemoglobin just soaks it all up. So the DLCO becomes this one powerful number that tells us about the overall health of the membrane. It basically bundles up the area, thickness, and diffusivity from Fick's law into a single clinical index.
The way we do it is with the single breath maneuver. It's pretty straightforward. The patient takes a deep breath of a special gas mixture with a tiny, harmless amount of CO. They hold that breath for exactly 10 seconds. That's the diffusion time. Then they exhale. We measure the CO concentration in the air they breathe out, compare it to what they breathed in, and from that difference, we can calculate how much CO was taken up by their blood. So what's a normal value? In a healthy person just sitting there, it's about 25 milliliters per minute per mmHg. But here's what's really interesting. In a healthy person, that number goes way up with exercise. Why? Because you recruit and distend more capillaries, which increases the surface area for diffusion. In patients with diseases like pulmonary fibrosis, this ability to increase the DLCO with exercise is severely blunted, or even absent. That's a key diagnostic feature. Now for our last section, the two components. To really understand what a DLCO value means, we have to go one level deeper. We need to appreciate that the total resistance to gas getting from the alveolus onto a hemoglobin molecule actually comes from two separate places. It's not just about crossing the physical membrane.
And this quote from Dr. West's work really captures it perfectly. The gas molecule zips across that tiny 0.3 micron barrier, but its journey isn't over. It still has to travel through the plasma, get across the red blood cell's membrane, and then, this is a big one, it has to actually find and chemically react with a hemoglobin molecule.
And this whole idea is captured mathematically in the Rautenforster equation. The easiest way to think about it is like resistances in an electrical circuit. The total resistance, which is 1 over the DLCO we measure, is the sum of two parts. First, you have the membrane resistance, 1 over dm. That's the physical barrier. Second, you have the resistance inside the blood, which is 1 over theta Vc. This part represents the reaction rate with hemoglobin, that's theta, and the volume of blood in the capillaries, Vc.
And here's where it becomes so clinically useful. When you see a low DLCO, you now have to ask why. Is it a membrane problem, a low DM, like you'd see in pulmonary fibrosis where the wall is thick? Or is it a blood side problem, a low VC? You see that in anemia where you just don't have enough hemoglobin, or after a big pulmonary embolism that wipes out a large chunk of the capillary bed. This model helps us dissect the cause of the gas exchange impairment. And as a final point, it's worth knowing that in Europe, they often call this the transfer factor, or TLCO. And you know that name is probably a bit more honest. It acknowledges that in a real, diseased lung, the final number we measure is affected by more than just pure diffusion. Things like ventilation-perfusion mismatch play a huge role.
So this leaves us with something to think about. We're taught, and we operate on the principle, that CO2 transfer is never limited by diffusion because it's so soluble. But is that always true? What about in the most critically ill patients with the most destroyed lungs? It's a good reminder to always question the limits of our models. Thank you for your time. I hope you found this useful. Medicine is filled with these long-standing assumptions, and progress really begins when we start to question them. So, treat all sources with a healthy dose of skepticism, and definitely take the time to review Dr. West's book on respiratory physiology.